Deuteronomy chapters 32 to 34 today, and that will finish the book of Deuteronomy. So just this and then the summary to do next before we move on to the next book. This one opens with the mention that Moses then goes out and speaks to all of Israel. I thought this whole thing was a big speech from Moses to Israel, so I've missed the transition somewhere where he stopped doing his big long speech and something else happened. I don't think it really matters, but I suppose I ought to declare that. There's mention here that Moses writes down all of these rules that have just been stated again in the book of Deuteronomy, and then this is all placed into the Ark of the Covenant. So by my reckoning, the Ark of the Covenant should contain the stone tablets on which the Ten Commandments are written, then the Book of the Covenant, and then also this third version of the rules, I think. Much of this takes the form of basically a handover from Moses to Joshua, because as we said, Moses' death is imminent now. And one of the things that comes up in that, as Joshua's having his induction, for want of a better word, God is saying that despite everything that's just been said over the last 2 or 3 books about all the rules, don't do the other gods thing, that the Israelites are going to drift off to other gods. And it's it's not massively surprising, I suppose, given we've seen what behaviour has been going on and the weird call they have to go and do weird things with other gods. So bizarre still. But yeah, God is saying that, and he knows what they are predisposed to do. There's an interesting question there in that I guess that brings up the free will question, in that you sometimes hear people saying, well, if God sees everything that's happened and knows the future, then there can't be free will. And it's a rubbish argument, I think. It doesn't seem to make much sense. I heard a good example of how this might work on a very basic level. I mean, granted, we're talking serious stuff. But I love Formula 1. And the last race that was on, I didn't manage to see it live. And I accidentally, before I got to sit down and heard it live, found out that Ferrari won it. So I watched the race and sure enough, Ferrari won it. It's obviously the case that just because I knew before I watched the race that Ferrari were going to win it, that there was still free will, it still could have been anything, and it's all the rest of it. It's had no bearing on the outcome that I happened to know what it was. The obvious objection there, of course, is that it's just me watching something that's already happened. But I think the principle is reasonable, that I'm offset in time from when that race happened, or rather, my watching of that race is offset in time from when it actually happened. And if God created the universe, including time, he therefore has to be outside of time. Therefore, by definition, he would be offset from all of time. Therefore, it would make perfect sense that he could see everything from the beginning of time to the end of time, in the same way as you could go back and watch any historical race or sporting or anything that's already been recorded, with having no impact on it. You're just observing what has happened over that period, taking nothing away from the free will that would have existed during that time. And I appreciate that the example of watching a sporting event that's already happened is a poor proxy for how that might work in terms of a God being outside of time. But it seems like a good way to illustrate the point. So we're going to dismiss that free will argument. Just because God might know the future doesn't mean there's no free will. I think that's an easy one to put down, I think. One of God's answers to the problem that he knows the Israelites are going to not listen and they're going to go off and do things with other gods is he writes a song about it that he teaches to Moses, that Moses then has to teach to the people. Presumably this was originally written in Hebrew, and that will explain why none of it rhymes and it's a pretty crap song, but it is extremely long, so Meatloaf would have approved. It's basically a compressed version of everything that's gone before, basically of the story. Very poetic, not my cup of tea at all. Not very catchy, I don't think. Maybe in Hebrew it's a proper goer, but it's in English not so great. And it's interesting that God thinks, despite everything he's already done, he knows they're going to go off and do weird things with other gods because that's what they're predisposed to do. And the answer is a song. I guess he doesn't think that the song is going to actually fix anything. But there's no way anyone's going to criticise him for not making clear what people are supposed to be doing and what people are not supposed to be doing. That's all throughout these first 5 books. Well, from Exodus onwards, to be fair. That no one could ever argue that it wasn't made clear what they were supposed to be doing. Chapter 33 is quite a boring blessing on the descendants of Jacob/Israel. the way it's written does suggest, to some extent, it almost makes it sound like perhaps it's talking about them enduring in some sense, in terms of perhaps an afterlife, but it's far from conclusive on that, and it's definitely not clear that that is the case. So another somewhat cryptic reference potentially to enduringness of human souls, but definitely nothing we can actually put our finger on and say, yes, okay, this is now where the introduction of that idea has come from. Again, long, poetic, quite boring, not my cup of tea at all, so move on from that. We then have Moses goes up a mountain, sees the promised land as God said he would, and then at the age of 120 he dies. It's written in the tone is quite, not, I don't want to say positive, but it's certainly not negative. It's not like Moses is upset about dying by the sounds of it. It just sounds like he's, to be fair, he's had a pretty hard life, hasn't he? He's 120 years old, so I guess that's right. But he doesn't seem worried about, there's no mention that he's worried about where he's going or anything like that. And then the way it's worded in the Bible, it suggests that God actually takes Moses and buries him. But it does state that no one knows where he's buried. So it's for some bizarre reason that one needs to be a mystery. Which I guess potentially ties into slightly convenient, no one knows where he's buried, so you can't find him. Don't think that matters. It's not like finding the body of Moses would achieve very much, I don't think. Perhaps that's historically naive. But either way, it sounds like God buries him somewhere and no one is to know where that is. So that is the end of what is sometimes referred to as the Pentateuch, the 5 books that Moses is supposed to have written. Obviously, there's a small problem in the end there that he's talking about how he was buried. So obviously he didn't write that, or he knew in advance and wrote it in advance. I don't know, but it sounds more likely he had some help. I think there is still some question marks over whether Moses wrote the first 5 books, but it sounds like it's generally agreed, but not necessarily with a massive degree of confidence, perhaps. So perhaps that suggests that there's a bit more help going on there. But yeah, so that is the end of the book of Deuteronomy. Next video will be the summary, and then after that we'll get on and see what Joshua gets up to when he takes over the reins.